Hey guys, welcome to lesson number 4 in this course from complete beginner to club player. This is Master Michel, and in this lesson we're going to learn 3 basic concepts about chess endgames. In general, we're going to say that chess games have 3 phases. The first one is going to be the opening, where you develop your pieces and you castle. The second one is going to be the middle game, where there will be a very big fight to try to get some advantage. And then we will have the end game. It's the final phase of the game where you're going to try to convert any advantage that you could have got during the game. So today we are going to learn 3 basic but key concepts about endgames. So let's get started. The first thing we need to learn is the rule of the square. We are going to use this position to understand this rule. Let's say it is white's turn and black pawn is advancing this way, and the question is, what is going to happen? Is the king going to be able to capture the pawn, or is the pawn going to promote? Black is getting a queen and black is going to win the endgame. So analyze it on your own and I will explain you very soon. So the idea is that we can calculate move by move, and then we can see that white is actually going to be able to get a draw here. They can capture the pawn at some point. So we can say king e4, black can play b3, then king d3, and then after b2, white is playing king c2. And well, even when black can promote, we are taking the pawn, or also if they don't promote, we are taking the pawn on b2. So the idea is that white is going to be able to survive and hold the game and get a draw here, starting by playing king e4. As you saw, this analysis takes some time, and also we have the risk of making mistakes in the calculation. And also this one is not too complicated, but sometimes it's even more complicated when the pawn is, for example, here and the king is farther. So there is we don't need to calculate move by move when we have something like this. We have what we call the rule of the square. This rule states that we're going to draw a square from the pawn to the promotion rank, and as you can see, the pawn is going to be a corner in this square. So it's going to be something like this, and the idea is that if the king can get into that square with the move of that side, then we could say that the endgame is going to be a draw. Another way to draw this square is by using a diagonal. So for example, from the pawn up to promotion rank, and then we can draw the square very easily using that diagonal, and then we can see that the king is getting into that square, so we can say that the endgame is going to be a draw. This is another example. It's a little bit more complicated. It is white's turn. What is going to happen in this one is white getting a draw, is black promoting and winning the endgame with a queen. Okay, well, if we draw the square, we can see that for example, we start here and then we draw the diagonal, and then we can see that the square is like this. So we can see that the king is getting into this square very easily with king either g6 or g5. So it looks like white king is going to be able to capture the pawn and get a draw. We can calculate it to make sure this is fine. For example, king g5, b5, king f4, b4, king e3, b3, king d2, b2, and then we can play king c2, and we're going to capture that pawn in the next turn. So yeah, this is working fine, and with king g6 or king g5, we're going to get a draw here. And one last example about the rule of the square. It is white's turn here. What is going to happen? Well, this one is a little tricky. If we analyze things the same way we did previously, it looks like it's going to be a draw, as this is probably the square. However, this pawn is in the base. That means that this pawn is going to advance 2 steps in the next move. So we should think about this pawn as a pawn actually already on the 6th rank. So the square for this pawn is going to be like this. So yeah, when we play the first move, king e5 or king g6, the king is not going to make it into the square. So we are not able to get a draw here. This is a win for black. So keep that in mind. We are going to draw the square for a pawn in the base as if it was 1 step ahead, as it can advance 2 steps in the first turn. That's something we should do. So yeah, we can analyze it, but that's the way it works. Let's say we play king g5, they play 5, king f4, a4, king e3, a3, king d2, and well, after a2, we are not able to stop the pawn. They are just promoting and winning this endgame. The second endgame concept that I want you to learn in this lesson is opposition. Opposition means that one king goes in front of the other king with one square in the middle. Whenever this happens, we can say that this king is taking opposition. So after king here, we are taking opposition, and this is actually very powerful in endgames. The idea is that whenever you take opposition, you're controlling the 3 squares between both kings. This means that if this king is going to move somewhere, it cannot advance ahead. So the king needs to move either to a side or back. And this is going to be very good because once you're playing with more pieces on the board, your king is going to be able to advance. Like if this king goes to a side, you will be able to advance over the other side. This is going to be very important in endgames, and especially pawn endgames. It's going to be decisive. If we can master opposition, we have for sure an advantage in the endgame. And also something we need to understand is that there are some kinds of opposition. This is like regular opposition here, but also we can talk about diagonal opposition when it's over a diagonal, or distant opposition when there is an odd number of squares between both kings. We say that we took distant opposition. We don't need to know much about it. We are not going to work with diagonal or distant opposition by now, but I think it's important to understand regular opposition because that's something we are going to use for sure in some next endgame lessons. Finally, I want to talk about this endgame. It's a pawn endgame where we have an extra outside passed pawn, and this is an endgame that we can win more or less easily if we know the technique to play this kind of positions. The idea here is that we are going to use this pawn as a distraction. We are going to make this king go over this side of the board, and then we will be able to capture the enemy pawns on the king side with our king. But there are some steps that we need to follow when we are going to play an endgame like this. And the first step, not only in this one, but also in basically every endgame, is going to be to activate the king. So first of all, we're going to activate the king as much as possible. Probably we're bringing the king somewhere over this area, really active. Then we're going to start advancing our pawn to distract the enemy king and make that king go over there. And at the right moment, when we can have some important advantage in time, we will go to the king side and we will capture the pawns on the other side of the board. So those are the 3 steps. Activate your king, use the pawn as a distraction on the queen side, and go to the king side, capture pawns, and win easily on the king side. So for example, the endgame could be like this. We're going to activate the king as much as we can. Secondly, once we get a position where we cannot advance much more, we should start advancing our pawn, and we can use it as a distraction. So the enemy king has to go over there. Even if the king does not want to stay over there, you will continue advancing, and at some point the king will have to pay attention to this pawn because it's going to promote. So let's assume something like this, and this is probably already a good moment to go to the king side and capture those pawns. You can also delay a little more. You can maneuver a little, advance this pawn a little more. There are some things we can do here. Once you master the endgame, it's going to be much simpler. But well, if you want, you can already go over there, because as you can see, when they capture the pawn, you are ahead in the race of the kings trying to capture the enemy pawns. Like you are like 2 steps from capturing black pawns, as the enemy king is like in 5 or 6 steps from capturing our pawns. If you guys have any question, let me know in the comments. Lesson number 5 is going to be here once it's recorded. Thank you so much, guys. Like, subscribe. See you on the next.